If you have ever driven down Centre Road in Clayton South, ridden the Pakenham line through Clayton Station, learned to drive in a Beetle, or owned a Kombi, you have driven past the largest automobile factory the Southern Hemisphere ever lost to Germany. Here is the contrast that defines this story. Between June 1954 and the 15th of July 1976, the Volkswagen Australasia factory at 1486 to 1550 Centre Road, Clayton South, Victoria, built 260,055 Beetles, plus transporters, Type 3s, Karmann Gaius and 887 locally designed country buggies. At its peak in January 1968, the factory employed over 2,200 Australians and held 11.6% of the Australian car market, more than every other European brand combined. In July 1968, the German parent company in Wolfsburg wrote off $50 million in Australian tooling, created the master body jig and shipped it to Brazil, and cut the Clayton workforce from 1,653 to 971 in 12 months. The man who signed the press release was Kurt Lotz, successor to Heinz Nordhoff, who had died of heart failure 3 months earlier. In the week of the 13th of October 2025, the factory was demolished. The only surviving address on the entire 145,000 square metre site is a street sign called Kombi Road. Chapter 1. The factory that was demolished last October. Tuesday morning, the 14th of October, 2025. Clayton South, Victoria. The temperature is 21 degrees. The Pakenham line train rattles past Clayton Station. 1555 Centre Road, the Bosch Australia head office. From a third-floor window, Paul Gekas, Business Development Manager, is filming on his phone. Across the road at 1486 to 1550. Centre Road, a 90-ton hydraulic excavator on rubber tracks is pulling the roof trusses off the press hall. The building it is demolishing was, between 1954 and 1992, the largest car factory in the Southern Hemisphere, not owned by General Motors or Ford. It was built by Martin and King Proprietary Limited, as a railway carriage works in the late 1940s. It was bought by Volkswagen Wolfsburg in 1957. It was the largest single private investment by a German company in Australian history. It is being demolished this week to make way for a data centre. The site, 145,883 square metres, approximately 100 acres, owned now by the Goodman Group. Architect, Group GSA. The future use, per the development application, a state-of-the-art data centre. The operator has not been publicly named. The only surviving address on the entire site is a street sign on the western boundary that says Kombi Road. The history, between June 1954 and the 15th of July 1976, this factory built 260,055 Beetles. At its peak in January 1968, it employed over 2,200 Australians and held 11.6% of the Australian car market. The owner who built it, Volkswagen Wolfsburg, founded in 1938 by Adolf Hitler. The owner who walked away, the same Wolfsburg, in July 1968. The man filming from across the road, Paul Gekas, works for Bosch, the German electric supplier that had supplied Volkswagen Australasia from 1956. The neighbour was filming the funeral. This is the story of the largest car factory the Southern Hemisphere ever lost to Germany, and the German company that built it walked away from it, sold the master body jig to Brazil, sold the company to Japan, and watched the building be demolished in October 2025 for a data centre. Chapter 2. Hitler's People's Car. To understand what was demolished at 1486 Centre Road last October, you have to go back 91 years. June 1934. Berlin. Adolf Hitler signs a contract with a 58-year-old Austrian Bohemian engineer named Ferdinand Porsche, born in Maffersdorf, Bohemia, on the 3rd of September 1875. The brief: design a Volkswagen, a people's car, affordable to a German factory worker, capable of carrying a family of 4 at 100 kilometers per hour on the new German Autobahnen, air-cooled, rear-engined, simple to maintain. The 28th of May, 1937. The German Labour Front, the Nazi state's official trade union, incorporates the Gesellschaft zur Vorbereitung des Deutschen Volkswagens GmbH, the corporate predecessor of Volkswagen. The 26th of May, 1938. Hitler personally lays the foundation stone of a new factory and a new town in Lower Saxony. Approximately 50,000 spectators. The new town is named KdF-Stadt, Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy. After the war, it will be renamed Wolfsburg, the 1st of August, 1938. The Nazi state launches the KdF Wagen Savings Stamp Scheme, 5 Reichsmarks per week, deducted from the German workers' pay packet. After 750 stamps, about 3 years of saving, a Volkswagen. 336,000 Germans sign up. Not one of them receives a car before the war. Read that again. 336,000 deposits. 0 cars. The German worker paid for the Volkswagen factory and never got the Volkswagen. The 16th of September, 1938. The company is renamed Volkswagen Werk GmbH. The 1st of September, 1939. Germany invades Poland. War begins. Within weeks, the Wolfsburg factory is requisitioned for military production. The wartime products of the factory that was built to give every German worker a car, the Kuebel-Wagen, the Wehrmacht's equivalent of the American Jeep. Tens of thousands built. The Schwimmwagen, the amphibious 4-wheel-drive military scout vehicle used on the Eastern Front. V-1 flying bomb components, the pulse-jet weapon launched against London from June 1944. Aircraft repair facilities for the Luftwaffe. The factory that Hitler had founded to put a Beetle in every German driveway was by the autumn of 1939 building weapons, and from 1942 it was built and run by forced labour. 20,000 people. 2/3 of the factory. Chapter 3. The Forced Labour. This chapter is difficult. April 1942. The Arbeitsdorf concentration camp opens inside the grounds of the Wolfsburg factory, a subcamp of Neuengamme, run by the SS Bauleitung. Across the war, the Wolfsburg plant grows to contain 4 concentration camps and 8 forced labour camps. Total forced labour over the course of the war, approximately 20,000 people. By May 1944, over 4,800 Ostarbeiter, Eastern workers, primarily from occupied Ukraine and Russia, at the plant. 650 Jewish women are brought in to assemble munitions. And in 1944, a Volkswagen engineer travels to Auschwitz. He walks the selection ramp. He selects 300 Hungarian Jewish metalworkers from the arriving transports. This is not folklore. This is documented in the Volkswagen Company's own commissioned history. Das Volkswagenwerk und seine Arbeiter im Dritten Reich by Hans Mommsen, published in 1996. Volkswagen's own official statement, posted on the corporate website in April 2020 to mark the 75th anniversary of liberation, reads as follows. In 1944, 2/3 of the people working at the factory were there against their will, facing racial discrimination. Read that again. 2/3 of the company that will, in 9 years, become the family car of Australia. 11th of April, 1945. American troops liberate the plant. Volkswagen's own corporate communication, published in 2020, says, on the day of liberation, there were about 9,100 people working at the plant, of whom more than 7,700 were forced labourers from other countries. The largest group, of 3,000 people, came from the Soviet Union, chiefly from Ukraine. 7,700 out of 9,100. On a single day in April 1945, 15th of December 1945, French authorities arrest Ferdinand Porsche, along with his son Ferry and his son-in-law Anton Pieck, the wartime Wolfsburg plant director. They are held without trial in Dijon for 20 months on war crimes allegations, including the use of forced labour. 1st of August 1947. Porsche is released on bail. 30th of January 1951. Ferdinand Porsche dies in Stuttgart, aged 75. The reparations record 4 decades later. 1986. Volkswagen commissions Mommsen's independent history. 1991. VW pays 12 million Deutschmarks to surviving forced labourers. 11th of September 1998. The VW board, meeting in Frankfurt, establishes a $12 million humanitarian relief fund. Trustees include former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres and former Austrian Chancellor Franz Vranitzky. Dadu spokesman Klaus Cox tells the Washington Post that the fund acknowledges moral and historic obligation, not legal liability. 1999. The place of remembrance of forced labour in the Volkswagen factory exhibition opens at Wolfsburg. It is still there. And in August 1945, 4 months after liberation, a British Army major from a Yorkshire mill town walked through the bombed gates of the same factory and saved it from being dynamited. Chapter 4. Major Ivan Hurst, R.E.M.E. August 1945. Wolfsburg, Lower Saxony. 4 months after US liberation. 3 months after Victory in Europe Day. Major Ivan Hurst, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, arrives at the bombed and overgrown Wolfsburg plant as senior resident officer of the British military government. Hurst was born in Saddleworth on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border on the 1st of March 1916. Trained as an instrument maker, speaks German. 29 years old at the time of his Wolfsburg arrival. What Hurst found: bomb damage from RAF raids, drainage systems broken, machinery hidden in outbuildings by retreating German engineers. 9,100 people still on site, most of them displaced forced labourers with nowhere to go, plus surviving German staff. The factory was under threat of being demolished as war reparations or sold off for scrap to British steel mills. Hurst made a decision. The factory had potential. August 1945. The British Army places an order for 20,000 Type 1 saloons, Beetle staff cars for the British Army of the Rhine. 27th of December 1945. The first post-war civilian Beetle rolls off the line. Within a year, the rate is 1,000 cars per month. 1947. The British Army, having stabilised the operation, offers the entire Wolfsburg plant free of charge to Ford Morris, Humber and the British government. All of them refuse. The official British report, popularly attributed to its lead commissioner Lord Roots, includes the following assessment. The vehicle does not meet the fundamental technical requirement of a motor car. It is quite unattractive to the average buyer. To build the car commercially would be a completely uneconomic enterprise. Britain, in 1947, was offered Volkswagen and turned it down. 20th of November 1947, Major Hurst, unable to give the factory away, recruits a former Opel director instead. Heinrich Nordhoff, born in Hildesheim, the 6th of January 1899, managing director of the Opel Brandenburg truck plant from 1942 to 1945, denazification cleared 1947. 1st of January 1948. Nordhoff officially takes the post of managing director. Production in his first year doubles. 19,244 cars in 1948, 8th of October 1949. The British military government formally transfers the trusteeship of Volkswagen Werk GmbH to the German government. Major Hurst departs. Under Nordhoff, Wolfsburg builds its 1 millionth Beetle on the 5th of August 1955. It builds its 10 millionth by 1965. The factory the British Army saved becomes the largest car manufacturer in Europe. And in 1953, 2,000 kilometres south of Singapore, Regent Motors of Melbourne ordered its first Beetle. Chapter 5. Regent Motors and Clayton. 1953. Melbourne. Regent Motors. 67 Queen's Road. The first Australian importer of the Volkswagen Beetle. June 1954. The first CKD, completely knocked down, Beetle is assembled at the Martin and King Proprietary Limited Railway Carriage Works at Clayton, Victoria. The driver in the press photographs, Baron Klaus Detloff von Oertzen, Nordhoff's personal special agent, a friend of Ferdinand Porsche from their pre-war Mercedes-Benz days in Stuttgart. 1955. Regent Motors forms Volkswagen Australia Proprietary Limited. 7,313 VWs sold. The Australian press calls the Beetle the German motor scooter you can drive in the rain. 1955, 1956, 1957. Volkswagen wins the Red X Round Australia trial, the Ampol trial and the Mobile Gas trial, outright, 3 consecutive years. The reputation is built on red dust roads and creek crossings. 1957. Heinz Nordhoff flies to Melbourne. He visits the Martin and King line at Clayton with Baron von Oertzen. He looks at the Australian sales figures. He makes the decision. Volkswagen Australasia Proprietary Limited is incorporated in 1957. Capital, £10 million. Ownership, 51% Volkswagen Werk Wolfsburg, 49% Regent Motors, LNC Industries and Clyde Industries. Nordhoff is chairman. The Australian Managing Director, Alan V. Gray. The Martin and King Clayton Holdings, Railway Carriage Works, Sheet Metal Shop, Paint Shop are purchased outright. Martin and King's railway business relocates to Port Melbourne. Bill King, the founder's eldest son, becomes a long-serving Australian VW Australasia director. The site, from 1488 to 1550 Centre Road, Clayton South, approximately 100 acres, beside the Pakenham line, beside Monash University, which will open 3 years later in 2061, directly across the road. The migrant workforce of 1955 to 1957, named in the museum's Victoria Photo Archive of the original Martin and King VW lines. German tradesman Wurmir Heim, called Danny K by his Australian workmates, Willy Futh, Kurt Heige. The Dutch brothers Gerald and Hank Baumeister. Hendrik, Bob and John Cassie, also Dutch. Maltese trim hand Paul Camilleri. The Italian, Greek and Yugoslav arrivals of the late 1950s and early 1960s would join them by the hundreds. And among the German tradesmen who arrived at Clayton in the early 1960s, emigrating from a post-war Germany still rebuilding, was a young toolmaker named Klaus Peters. Klaus Peters is the human spine of this story, the German migrant who built the Australian car that Wolfsburg would abandon. By 2062, the Clayton factory was building Beetles at 90 units per day, with 95% Australian content. Chapter 6. The Master Body Jig. To understand what was lost in July 1968, you have to walk into the Clayton factory in 1965, not the boardroom, the fine measuring room, 1958. The Master Body Jig arrives at Clayton from Wolfsburg, crated, shipped by sea via the Port of Melbourne. It is only the second such jig outside Germany, South Africa. Got the first in 1956. The jig, a precision-engineered cast steel framework 3 metres long, against which every Beetle body shell produced at Clayton is measured for dimensional tolerance. Tolerances are measured in fractions of a millimetre. It is the most precision piece of industrial tooling in the Southern Hemisphere in 1958. The fine measuring room is built around it. Temperature controlled. Concrete floor floated on rubber mounts to dampen vibration. 3 German metrology technicians, seconded from Wolfsburg, run the room until the early 1960s. The JAG is the heart of the entire Plan A operation. It is the reason Clayton can claim to build a Beetle indistinguishable from a Wolfsburg Beetle. 1959. The first Australian-made body panels are stamped. Transporter flat panels first, then Beetle doors. The press tooling. Chrysler Adelaide, more than £2 million in dies, contracted by Volkswagen Australasia to keep the work onshore. CKD imports end. Full manufacturing begins at up to 90 cars per day. By 1967, every shop on the Clayton site, the non-ferrous foundry, aluminium and magnesium light alloys, was the largest in Australia. 3 die casting machines of 100, 200 and 800 tonnes. The engine machine shop, every air-cooled flat 4 block, every cylinder head, every crankcase machined in Clayton. The pressed steel shop, every Beetle door, bonnet, fender and roof stamped on Chrysler-built dies. The body weld shop, Wolfsburg spec spot weld guns, the master jig in the fine measuring room. The paint shop, a 7-stage line, balm paint later Dulux. The trim shop, German and Dutch and Italian migrant tradesmen at the seats and headliners and dashboards. Final assembly, the moving line, 90 cars per day at peak, the Beetle being driven off the end of the line under its own power for the first time. The suppliers across the road and around the corner. Bosch Australia, Electrics, 1555 Centre Road, present since 1956. Olympic tyres, balm, paint. Chrysler Adelaide, press dies. And at his bench in the toolmaker's shop, the German migrant Klaus Peters, 20-something, recently arrived, working in the German precision tradition transplanted to Clayton, maintained the Wolfsburg spec jigs and gauges, the smell of cutting oil, the hot steel under the milling cutter, the bench micrometer at 1/1000th of an inch tolerance. And in 1962, the Clayton Marketing Office received a phone call. Graham Massingham, Cadet Marketing Officer, answered. The caller, Ray McMahon, leader of the Australian National Antarctic Research Expedition. McMahon wanted to know if Clayton could supply a winterised Beetle for Mawson Station. The answer was yes. 3 Antarctic Beetles were built at Clayton across 1963 to 1966. Antarctica 1, ruby red, 1962.5. Antarctica 2, orange, 1965. Antarctica 3, 1966. All 3 featured in worldwide VW advertising as the Red Terror. And in 1965, the orange Antarctica 2, built at this factory, sent to Mawson Station, came back to Clayton on a Norwegian whaler, wrecked in a blizzard beyond economic repair. Chapter 7. The Peak, 11.6%, 1962 to 1967. The Plan A Peak. The 5 years that defined Australian Volkswagen. The Clayton factory was one of 3 major industrial employers in Melbourne's southeast migrant corridor. VW Clayton, GMH Dandenong Building Holden, and the Heinz Cannery at Dandenong together employed tens of thousands of post-war migrants from Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, Germany, Holland, Malta, Lebanon and Turkey. The streets of the Clayton VW story: Centre Road, Springvale Road, Clayton Road, Wellington Road, Princes Highway, Huntingdale Road, Wickham Road. In 1961, Monash University opened immediately adjacent to the VW factory 3 years after Volkswagen's full manufacture commitment. The university students would cross Centre Road to buy parts for their father's Beetles at the VWA service counter. December 1963. Volkswagen Australasia hits peak market share, 11.6%, more than every other European brand combined. Australia in 1963 is, outside Germany itself and possibly Brazil, the most Beetle-saturated country on Earth. Peak workforce at Clayton, approximately 2,200 on the floor, early 1966 to January 1968, per the Motor Producers Limited. 1968, Business Report. Italian, Greek, Yugoslav, German, Dutch, Maltese, tradesmen and toolmakers and welders and painters. Peak annual sales, 25,577 Volkswagens sold across Australia in 1965, 18,077 Beetles, 3,158 Type 3 1500s, 4,311 transporters, 31 Karmann Gias. Peak unit production, approximately 34,000 vehicles in 1964. Peak dealership network, 330 outlets across Australia by 1965. Antarctic Beetle program continues. The Orange Antarctica 2 serves at Mawson Station through the 1965 winter. Wrecked in a blizzard, returned to Clayton on a Norwegian whaler, found beyond economic repair, and consigned to the factory salvage yard at the back of the pressed steel shop. Klaus Peters buys the wreck. His fiancée's father, looking at the dented orange hulk on a trailer in suburban Springvale, called it that piece of orange peel. Klaus Peters worked on Antarctica 2 in his own time, in his own garage, for the better part of 2 years. He restored the body, rebuilt the engine, removed the winterizing package, the cabin heater, the snowplow, the studded tyres, and repainted the orange. He competed with the rebuilt Antarctica 2 in motorcarness and rallies with the Light Car Club of Melbourne, and he won the BP Rally of Victoria in the dewinterized ex-Antarctic Beetle with Peter Batrick navigating. 1967. Pat Whitaker's Clayton workshops prepared a Beetle for the Southern Cross Rally. Driver, Barry Ferguson. Navigator, Dave Johnson. They won the first international rally won by a Beetle anywhere in the world. Barry Ferguson's family still owns the car in 2026. 1968. The Clayton-designed country buggy entered production, designed by Managing Director Rudy Hertzmeyer and engineer Cyril Harcourt as an Australian competitor to the Minimoke. 1,956 built, 887 sold in Australia. March 1967. The 250,000th Australian VW rolled off the line. The milestone passed uncelebrated. Inside Volkswagen Australasia, the losses were mounting. And in December 1967, Wolfsburg sent an audit team to Clayton. Chapter 8. The December 1967 Audit. Volkswagen Australasia's losses, 1966 to 1967. 1966, 3.72 million Australian dollars. The first annual loss in VWA's history. 1967, 2.6 million Australian dollars. Cumulative Plan A investment, approximately 50 million Australian dollars. Market share collapse, 11.6% in December 1963. 7.7% in 1964, 6.3% in 1965, 4.8% in 1966, 4.3% in 1967, 3.8% by September 1968. The structural trap. Plan A required 95% local content, but Europe had moved on. The 1965 big window Beetle 1500 was selling in Wolfsburg. Clayton could not afford to retool. Australian VW dealers were selling 1968 Beetles that were mechanically identical to 1961 Beetles, while Japanese imports, the Datsun 1000, the Toyota Corona, were arriving at Australian ports half-priced and modern. December 1967. A Wolfsburg audit team arrives at Clayton. The new German management team is installed. Alan V. Gray, the Australian Managing Director, is removed. J.R. Sullivan and William J. King depart the board. Dieter Korff appointed to head manufacturing. Rudi Hertzmer appointed to head inspection, later promoted to Managing Director. Dr. Alfred Solzer appointed to head finance. Jack Cook, Canadian, appointed Marketing Director. Wolfsburg-based directors added to the VRWA board. Dr. Karl Hahn, Otto Hearn de Friedrich Thomé, Alan Gray on his way out, on Plan A. The Australian content of the VW 1200 is 95%. This has been achieved at the cost of a factory worth £20 million. The German team's analysis is clean. The Australian operation cannot return Plan A's $50 million Australian dollars investment under any plausible market share scenario. Japanese imports will continue to grow. Australian local content rules will continue to trap the tooling. The recommendation goes back to Wolfsburg in late December 1967. Win back Australian manufacturing. Keep assembly. Cancel the master body jig program. Repatriate the tooling. The 12th of April 1968. In Wolfsburg, Heinz Nordhoff dies of heart failure, aged 69. He has been ill since the previous summer. The man who took the Australian decision is not alive to defend it. Read that again. Heinz Nordhoff died on the 12th of April 1968. Clayton was killed 3 months later. His successor takes over, Kurt Lotz, born in Friedensdorf, the 18th of September 1912. Former General Manager of Brown, Bovary and Sie, the new CEO of Volkswagen Werk. And in July 1968, Kurt Lotz signed the announcement. Australian $50 million written off. The master body jig was packed for Brazil. Chapter 9. The July 1968 wind back. July 1968. Volkswagen Australasia Limited publicly announces the withdrawal from Plan A. The announcement summarised in the on-record statement by Marketing Director Jack Cook. Under the new plans, Volkswagen could assemble up to 22,500 vehicles a year with a local content of 60%. This was down from 1964's Australian peak of more than 34,000 vehicles under Plan A. The Australian $50 million Plan A investment is written off. The master body jig, the precision tool installed at Clayton in 1958, the second such jig outside Germany, the heart of the entire fine measuring room, is crated and shipped to São Bernardo do Campo, Brazil. Volkswagen do Brazil will use it to continue building small window Beetles into the 1990s. The Australian master jig becomes the Brazilian master jig. The engine plant equipment is shipped to Malaysia. General press tooling is sold to Holden and Ford. The press hall at Clayton is converted to storage. Volkswagen Australasia Proprietary Limited is dissolved. Replaced by Motor Producers Limited, still fully owned by VW Germany, but freed by the wind back to assemble Datsun, Volvo and Mercedes alongside Beetles. The workforce collapse, January 1968. 1,653 Clayton employees. December 1968. 971 employees. 41% reduction in 12 months. 682 Clayton tradesmen, Italian, Greek, Yugoslav, German, Dutch, Maltese, out of work in a single year. The colony was cut. The Wolfsburg heartland kept building. Among the men who packed up their toolboxes that year, a German toolmaker named Klaus Peters. He sold the rebuilt Orange Antarctica too. He emigrated with his wife to Connecticut, USA. He later worked in IT at Southern Connecticut State University. The German migrant, who had bought a piece of his own factory's wreckage when Wolfsburg started shutting it down, left Australia when Germany left the factory. By year-end 1968, VW has fallen behind Austin into 7th place on the Australian market. Total 1968 VW sales 14,957, down from 25,577 in 1965. And in February 1969, 7 months after the Wolfsburg win-back announcement, Walt Disney's The Love Bug, the film about Herbie, the sentient beetle, premiered in Australia. 400 Beetles arrived at the MGM Chollara Twin Drive-In for the opening night. VW dealers across the country staged Herbie replicas in their showrooms. The cultural peak of the Australian Beetle arrived the year after its corporate abandonment. And in March 1976, Volkswagen sold the entire Australian operation to Nissan. Chapter 10. The Nissan Absorption, 1968 to 1975. Motor Producers Limited at Clayton continues assembling Beetles, Type 2 transporters and Type 3s, alongside an increasing volume of Datsuns. Assembled under contract for Nissan Australia, 1971. Nissan sells more vehicles in Australia than VW for the first time. Datsun 1200, Datsun UK 600, Datsun 180B. The Japanese imports the December 1967. Wolfsburg audit had warned about have done exactly what the audit predicted. October 1975. In Wolfsburg, Volkswagen CEO Tony Schmucker and Nissan in Tokyo agree the terms. Nissan will buy all the share capital of Motor Producers Limited plus the Clayton factory. March 1976. The handover. The purchase price is commercially confidential. Motor Producers Limited is wound up. Clayton becomes Nissan Motor Company, Australia, Proprietary Limited. The Wolfsburg connection to Australia ends after 22 years on Centre Road. 15th of July, 1976. The 250,055 and final Australian assembled Beetle rolls off the Clayton line. That is the final number. 250,055 Beetles built at 1,486 Centre Road over 22 years. Confirmed by Volkswagen's own production milestone register. The last Beetle is, by tradition, presented to a long-serving worker. The press coverage is minimal. March 1977. The last Australian VW Kombi, Golf and Passat assemblies cease. All Volkswagens hereafter are fully imported. Nissan production at Clayton, 1977 to 1992. Datsun 200B, 1977 to 1981. The Australian rear axle distinguishes it from the Japanese version. Nissan Gazelle, 1980 to 1984. Nissan Pulsar, 1981 to 1991. Nissan Skyline R31, 1986 to 1990. Nissan Pintara R31, 1986 to 1990. Nissan U12 Pintara and Ford Corsair, Project Matilda, 1989 to 1992, with a 500 million Australian dollars plant upgrade. 1985. Senator John Button, Federal Industry Minister in the Hawke-Garson government, announces the Button Car Plan. The plan rationalises 13 Australian-built models down to 6 across 3 production groups. Foreign-owned manufacturers must hit up to 85% local content for tariff exemptions. The same trap, different decade. 3rd of February 1992. From Tokyo, Nissan Motor Company announces it will close the Clayton plant in October. United Press International reports, Australia's worst recession since World War II forced Nissan Motor Company to announce. Monday it will close one of its auto plants there, eliminating 1,800 jobs. The causes: the tariff cut from 35% to 15%, rolling down 2.5 percentage points per year. The early 1990s recession, Keating's recession we had to have. A 125 million Australian dollars, 1991 loss. The Pantara and Corsair sales flop. October 1992, the Clayton factory closes. 1,800 Australians out of work. Chapter 11. The buildings. Through 2025, 1992 to 2025. The Centre Road site lives a long second life. Volvo cars. Australia leases parts of the assembly buildings through the 1990 Tares for limited Australian operations. HSV Holden Special Vehicles. Walkinshaw Racing Workshops occupy the southern parcel for 2 decades. Building HSV Maloos, Club Sports and GTSs through the 2010s. Goodman Group acquires the entire 145,883 square metre parcel during the late 2010s. 2024. Goodman files redevelopment plans via Architects Group GSA, covering the entire site, 4 precincts. Bosch Australia remains across the road at 1555 Centre Road. The same Bosch that supplied Clayton's Beetle electrics from 1956. Bosch Business Development Manager Paul Gekas has worked at 1555 Centre Road since 2008. The deaths through this period: Heinrich Nordhoff, 12th of April 1968, Wolfsburg, aged 69. Ferdinand Porsche, 30th of January 1951, Stuttgart, aged 75. Kurt Lotz, 27th of December 2005, Frankfurt, aged 93. Major Ivan Hurst, 10th of March 2000, Saddleworth, Yorkshire, aged 84. Baron Klaus von Oertzen, 1969, Pretoria, South Africa. Klaus Peters emigrated to Connecticut after 1968, later worked at Southern Connecticut State University. Current status, not in the open record. 2025. Goodman Group secures development approval for a state-of-the-art data centre on the former VW and Nissan footprint. The operator is not publicly disclosed. Early 2025. The former HSV Walkinshaw workshops are demolished. Week of the 13th to 18th of October 2025. The former Volkswagen, Volvo and Nissan factory itself is demolished. A 90-ton hydraulic excavator levels the press hall, the body weld shop, the paint shop, the engine plant, the foundry and the 1958 fine measuring room. The same room that had held the master body jig until July 1968. Paul Gekas films the demolition from his Bosch office window across Centre Road. The German electrics engineer who watched his German cousin company's Australian funeral. The only surviving address on the site, Kombi Road. Walk down Kombi Road today and look at the empty Goodman Group construction site. 260,055 Beetles came off this dirt. The master jig that built them is in Brazil. The data centre is coming in 2027. Chapter 12. The day after demolition. Saturday, the 18th of October 2025, the morning after the press hall came down. Paul Gekas walks across Centre Road from the Bosch office to the perimeter fence. The site is flat, save for a Komatsu PC900 and 4 8-metre-high piles of concrete and twisted steel. The street sign on the western boundary is still there, Kombi Road. The Goodman Group has not removed it. It is the only surviving name from the Volkswagen era. The hero artefacts surviving elsewhere in 2026, the 1967 Southern Cross Rally Beetle, still in Barry Ferguson's family ownership in New South Wales, was the first international rally win by a Beetle anywhere in the world, and it is still on the road. The Antarctic Beetles. Antarctica 1 and Antarctica 3 are unaccounted for. Antarctica 2, the orange beetle that Klaus Peters bought from the Clayton factory salvage yard in 1965, last raced in Light Car Club of Melbourne events in the early 1970s. Its current location is not in the public record. Museum's Victoria specimen ST229, a 1965 Clayton-built Beetle chassis donated by Volkswagen Proprietary Limited in 1965 to the then Science Museum of Victoria, was modified with cutaway sections for educational display and is now in the museum's Victoria Collection Store in Spotswood. The master body jig itself was shipped to São Bernardo do Campo in July 1968, used by Volkswagen do Brasil through the 1990s, and is presumed retired to a Brazilian VW archive after the South American Beetles' final production run on the 31st of July 1996. The country buggy, 1,956 built, has restored examples held by the Volkswagen Club of Australia, the Victorian branch. The Volkswagen Group's reparations record, 1991, 12 million Deutschmarks paid to surviving Wolfsburg forced labourers. 1992, $12 million humanitarian relief fund. 1993, the place of remembrance of forced labour in the Volkswagen factory opened at Wolfsburg. The Australian Windback has no equivalent memorial fund. And then there is Dieselgate. From 2015 to 2023, Volkswagen Group AG, the same company that wrote off $50 million Australian dollars in Australian tooling in July 1968, was fined more than $33 billion globally for emissions fraud. The Australian Federal Court alone awarded $127 million Australian dollars in penalties against Volkswagen Group Australia, $33 billion. The German parent company that took 336,000 worker deposits in 1938 and built no cars, that used 20,000 forced labourers in 1944, that wrote off $50 million Australian dollars in Clayton tooling in 1968, was, by 2020, the largest car manufacturer in the world. Walk past Kombi Road today and the only memorial to 2,200 Clayton tradesmen is a street sign. What do 260,055 Beetles teach us in 2026? Chapter 13. What 260,055 Beetles taught us? Stand from 1,486 to 1,550. Centre Road, Clayton South today. The former Volkswagen Australasia factory, built by Martin and King in the 1940s, expanded by Wolfsburg from 1957, peaking at over 2,200 employees in January 1968, sold to Nissan in March 1976, closed in October 1992, demolished the week of the 13th of October 2025, is flat dirt. The Goodman Group construction fence runs the entire 145,883 square metre perimeter. The data centre will begin construction in the first quarter of 2026 and complete in the fourth quarter of 2027. Across the road at 1,555 Centre Road, Bosch Australia still occupies the same premises it has held since 1956. The German electric supplier that outlived the German car manufacturer it had been brought in to serve. The only surviving name on the entire site is the street sign on the western boundary, Kombi Road. Heinz Nordhoff has been dead since the 12th of April 1968. Kurt Lotz since the 27th of December 2005. Major Ivan Hus since the 10th of March 2000. Ferdinand Porsche since the 30th of January 1951. Baron Klaus von Oertzen since 1969. Alan V. Gray, Bill King, J.R. Sullivan, Rudy Hertzmeyer, Cyril Harcourt, Graham Massingham, the German and Australian generation that built and dismantled Plan A, are largely gone. In Connecticut, Klaus Peters retired from Southern Connecticut State University at an unrecorded date. In Brazil, the master body jig that arrived at Clayton from Wolfsburg in 1958 may still exist in a Volkswagen do Brasil archivo in São Bernardo do Campo. In Wolfsburg, the place of remembrance of forced labour has been open since 1999. In Frankfurt, the Volkswagen Group board still meets in a tower 48 kilometres from where Adolf Hitler laid the foundation stone of the KdF Stadt on the 26th of May, 1938. Lesson 1. A foreign parent will always cut the colony before the heartland. Volkswagen invested 50 million Australian dollars in Clayton between 1957 and 1967. 260,055 Beetles came off Australian tooled presses. Over 2,200 Australian tradesmen, Italian, Greek, Yugoslav, German, Dutch, Maltese, built the car of post-war Australia at Centre Road, Clayton. In July 1968, with Heinz Nordhoff 3 months dead and Kurt Lotz at the helm, Wolfsburg wrote off 50 million Australian dollars. Created the master body jig, shipped it to Brazil, sold the engine plant to Malaysia, sold the press tooling to Holden and Ford, cut the workforce from 1,653 to 971 in 12 months. The Wolfsburg plant, the heartland, kept building. The colony was cut. Every overseas plant of every multinational parent operates on this rule. When the headquarters needs to choose, the colony loses. Australia is not exempt. Lesson 2. Local content rules can become local content traps. The Tariff Board's Plan A was meant to build an Australian car manufacturing industry. It worked. By 1962, the Australian-built Beetle was 95% Australian content, the highest local content of any foreign-designed car ever assembled in this country. But the same rule that made Plan A worth Volkswagen's £10 million investment in 1957 became the rule that trapped the factory in obsolete. 1961 tooling by 1965. Europe moved to the big window Beetle 1500. Clayton could not afford to retool. Australian VW dealers were selling 1968 Beetles that were mechanically identical to 1961 Beetles, while Japanese imports were arriving at Australian ports half-priced and modern. Plan A built Clayton. Plan A killed it. The 1985 Button Plan would do the same thing to Nissan 24 years later. A protected industry that cannot retool is a museum. Lesson 3. The war story was already written before Australia got involved. In 1938, Adolf Hitler took 336,000 deposits from German workers and built them no cars. In 1944, 2/3 of the people working at the Wolfsburg factory were there against their will. In 1944, a Volkswagen engineer travelled to Auschwitz and selected 300 Hungarian Jews from the arriving transports. In August 1945, a British Army major from Yorkshire rescued the factory from demolition. In November 1947, he handed it to a former Opel director from Hildesheim. By 1955, they had built 1 million Beetles. By 1965, 10 million. In Australia, in 1957, Heinz Nordhoff signed a £10 million contract to build Beetles at Clayton. In Australia, in 1968, his successor, Kurt Lotz, signed a press release writing off 50 million Australian dollars. In Australia, in 2025, the buildings came down. In Australia, in 2026, a data centre is going up. The Volkswagen company has changed names, changed CEOs, changed continents, changed product lines, changed regulators, paid $12 million in 1998 reparations, paid $33 billion from 2015 to 2023 emissions fines, and survived. Australia has not. The Volkswagen war story was written before the Clayton factory existed. The Clayton factory was a paragraph in a much longer book. The factory at 1486 to 1550 Centre Road, Clayton South, Victoria, is gone. The 1958 fine measuring room is rubble. the press hall, the body weld, the paint shop, the engine plant, the foundry, the trim shop, the final assembly line, gone. In São Bernardo do Campo, Brazil, the master body jig that built Australia's largest Beetle empire is probably still in a Volkswagen do Brasil archive. In Wolfsburg, the place of remembrance of forced labour has been open since 1999. In Hildesheim, Heinz Nordhoff's grave has stood since April 1968. In Saddleworth, Yorkshire, Major Ivan Hurst's grave has stood since March 2000. In Connecticut, Klaus Peters retired sometime after 2010. In New South Wales, Barry Ferguson's family still owns the 1967 Southern Cross Rally Beetle. In Clayton, Victoria, on the corner of Centre Road and Kombi Road, the Goodman Group construction fence is going up. The data centre is coming. 260,055 Beetles. 3 Antarctic Beetles. 1 Southern Cross Rally win. 1 master body jig, now in Brazil. 1 street called Kombi Road. Built strong. Built at Clayton. Built to last 17 years. The street sign survives. The factory does not.